Yeah, I would like to also echo Josh's sentiments from earlier. It's great to have you guys back. And also special thanks to Robert and to Alfred who led our worship in between there. And special thanks to basically my family besides Daryl, who's running the tech team up there. When you are married to or related to the minister, you get roped into all kinds of volunteer activities. So I needed some subs this morning, so yeah, my family and Daryl are making up the tech crew up there largely today, so thank you guys for that. I really appreciate the help. In many ways, I kind of grew up alongside the video game era. So the Atari predates me by a few years, but then by and large, as more video game systems started to come out, they were kind of along with me, along with my age group. So by the time I was in high school, we were playing PlayStations and things like that. My friends had them, and playing video games was a much more prominent part of people's lives. As I looked back on this idea, the way in which the video game industry, and in particular the graphics of video game industries, have come along is just incredible. So I thought we'd take a look at this. For instance, this is the Atari from 1977, the first kind of at-home video game console. We had games that looked largely like this, and this is pretty good for Atari. I mean, I think the big one was Pong that started, and it was literally like one block on a screen and 2 blocks over here, and they moved back and forth. But I mean, so this is Atari. This is pretty good from 1977. About 10 years later, the Nintendo came out, the original Nintendo, and we got graphics like this. This is better. Okay, this is a little better. Super Mario Brothers right here, classic. And then a few, maybe like 10 years after that, we get the Nintendo 64, and you can play Mario that looks like this. All right, so we've come a long way from Atari in 1977. We've already got some kind of 3D elements happening here in this one. And then we go from this one, and I skipped a few in between to kind of speed through the process here, but the PlayStation 5 was released in 2020, and that is not a picture of an actual football game. That is the video game, Madden, from 2020. Yeah, that's Mario. Yeah, he's suited up in the Panthers uniform right there. Right. So, I mean, we're talking just incredible links from the Atari in 1977 to the PlayStation 5 in 2020. And now not only can you play games that look something similar to this, but you can also play them in virtual reality headsets. Have you guys seen these? Okay. You can put them on and kind of almost experience what is happening around you. You can, in a large part, immerse yourself in this world, so much so sometimes that you might forget that there's another world around you.
You gotta hold the right trigger down.
Blue 42! Blue 42, hut!
You gotta hold it, keep it held down, and then don't move!
Oh, he did?
When you got the headset on, you might get a little too involved in the world there. And you might forget that there's another world outside of that headset that really exists around you. We've spent the last few months going chapter by chapter through the book of Daniel, and I hope that you found it informative. I hope it's been beneficial for you. It was a little bit of a different kind of preaching style for me. There was a lot of big historical information in there that was still fascinating, but nonetheless it was a little different presentation style. So hopefully you enjoyed it and you were able to take some things away and help your own study as we move forward. But today we're going to change our process a little. We finished the last chapter in Daniel last week. And as I've been teasing for a few weeks now, today we're going to take a step back and we're going to look at the big picture. And I teased that there was a big theme that I saw running throughout the book of Daniel. And to be fair, there are several. So I asked you to go through and think back through what we've studied or think back through the book of Daniel and see if there was a theme that maybe you could come up with that stuck out to you. So if you did that, I'd love to hear you. You can let me know afterwards what you came up with. It might be similar to mine. It might not. Again, there are several answers in there. But let's get going here this morning, and I'll share with you one of the big themes that I find in the book of Daniel, something that we can take from this book as a whole. And as we look for these clues, we'll find a pretty big one right in the very first chapter. Daniel chapter 1, if you recall, is the story of the capture of God's people. They are besieged by Babylon, which is just a terrible process. They're besieged by Babylon and they succumb. They are overtaken. The holy items from their temple are removed and they're put in the temples of a pagan god. All the best and the brightest students from Israel are taken to Babylon and they're being taught how to be good Babylonians. Things don't really look good for God's people. And it's in this first chapter that we meet kind of our four heroes, at least for the first half of this book: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And as they come into Babylonian service, they're also renamed to reflect the Babylonian gods. So we have Belteshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And as part of this training process, in order to become good Babylonians, these are the special group of people, and they are fed with food from the king's plate. They are fed with the king's choice food. But Daniel and his friends look at this and they don't think it's something that they should be partaking of. Most likely it was probably sacrificed to idols and things like that, and they don't feel comfortable eating this food. And so they ask not to. Is there a way that we can not eat this food? But there are some concerns about that choice. We read in Daniel 1, verse 10. But the official told Daniel, "I'm afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age?" See, there's a preconceived idea here, right? There's a way that this situation is supposed to go. The king has specifically picked this food because it's supposed to be the best. He picked this food for his trainees so that they would be in the best shape possible. But what if there's another way? What if there's a way that the king doesn't see? So Daniel and his friends propose a test. Okay, well, let us eat what we want and for 30 days, and you feed everybody else the other food. And at the end of 30 days, we'll see what we look like. And if we are that much worse, then okay, we'll go back to it. But test it and let's see. And a few verses later, we read this. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. See, there was a way that was supposed to go, and it didn't end up that way. Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream that worries him, that fills him with fear, and he can't figure it out. And his people can't figure it out. So he brings in Daniel. And through Daniel, God interprets this dream, a dream involving a large statue made up of all different kinds of materials. And the dream culminates with the picture of a rock. And there was a special note about the rock, if you remember. It was a rock that was not made by human hands. And it comes down and it knocks down the entire statue. Daniel chapter 3. Nebuchadnezzar builds a statue of gold, and he demands that everyone in the kingdom bow down and worship before it. And anyone who doesn't will be thrown into the fiery furnace. So Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego at this point, decline this invitation. We would not like to bow down before the king's statue. Thank you very much. We worship our own God, and we only bow before him. This, of course, enrages the king, and he orders that the furnace be heated 7 times hotter than normal, and that our friends be thrown into it. The fire at this point is so hot that as the guards approach the fire, the guards die before the boys are thrown in there. And the text actually says they just kind of fall in because the guards have keeled over. The fire is so hot. And if you're reading this story, or you're a part of this story even, this is it, right? I mean, if God were going to show up and rescue you, it would be before you fell into the fire, surely. If God was going to do something, it would be before now. And now that you're here in this fire that just killed the guards, I mean, there's only one way that this ends, right? There is a way that this is supposed to go. But what if there's another way? What if there's a way that they didn't see coming? What if there's a way that we didn't see coming? Then King Nebuchadnezzar leapt to his feet in amazement, and he asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, your majesty." And he said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar then orders that they be brought out of the fire, and we read this. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps Prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Daniel chapter 4. We see King Nebuchadnezzar at the height of his power. He is at this point the most powerful, the most wealthy, the most influential person on the face of the planet. And what at this point could go wrong? What could harm him? What could befall him? So one morning he reflects on all of this, his status, his place, the great Babylonian masterpiece that he has built. And he says, "Is this not the great Babylon that I have built for my glory?" And even as those words were on his lips, it starts to be taken from him. Daniel chapter 5, King Belshazzar gives a great banquet, and he decides to incorporate those holy items we talked about in chapter 1 into his big celebration. So he brings out God's holy things from God's temple, and he begins to celebrate with them. But while he celebrates with them, he starts to celebrate praising the gods of silver and gold and wood while using the instruments of God. And in the middle of this party, this ghost hand shows up and starts writing on the wall. And the message that the hand says is this. Basically, I see this. I'm seeing what's happening here. I see you, King Belshazzar, and I know who you are. And the message is, you have been weighed, and you have been found wanting. You're not all that you claim to be. Daniel chapter 6, King Darius issues a decree that for the next 30 days, everyone in the kingdom should pray only to him. The penalty for breaking this law? Be thrown into the lion's den. Daniel, of course, refuses to pray to this king. He refuses to pray to King Darius, and the jealous administrators catch him in the act of praying to his God. They report back to Darius, and there's only one thing to be done. Daniel is to be thrown into the lion's den. King Darius actually likes Daniel. He kind of gets tricked into making this edict, and now he's heartbroken because he doesn't know what to do. He signed the law. There's only one thing that must happen now. Daniel has to be thrown into the lion's den. There is a way that this is supposed to go. Once you're in the lion's den, you don't come out. This is the way things work. But what if there's another way? What if there's something the king doesn't see coming? What if there's something that we didn't see coming? At the first light of dawn, the king got up and he hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" Daniel answered, "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight." And then for the next 6 chapters, we read about all of the chaos that will befall this region for the next 300 years. King after king, egomaniac after egomaniac, war after war, battle after battle, and little Israel sitting right there in the middle of this tumultuous time, these powers to the north and these powers to the south just being tossed back and forth here and there. And what could they do? Were they going to stand against Alexander the Great? Were they going to stand against the Ptolemies and the Seleucids? Of course not. And the whole time, they have to be thinking, how will we survive this? I thought we were God's people. I thought God had a plan for us. I thought after these 70 years or so, we'd be done with all of this. And Daniel's looking at these prophecies and saying, oh no, it's going to last a lot longer than that. You guys are going to be tossed around for a long time. But what if there's another way? What if the way that it looks isn't exactly the way that it's going to end? And here's my theme for the book of Daniel. What if there is an alternate reality? What if there's something bigger happening behind the scenes? The truth is that there is truth that we don't always see. The truth is that there is hope that we don't always look for. In the world around us, there are ways that things are supposed to go. There are preconceived ideas about who wins and who loses, and what success looks like, and what it takes to get ahead, and how we're supposed to live, and what things we're supposed to strive after. And day after day, those things are just put before us. All day long, we are taught how to live and how to go and how to succeed in the world around us. So much so that those ideas can begin to warp our sense of reality. Like a virtual reality headset placed over our eyes, we begin to lose sight of what's here and what's there. and what is actually around us and what can be happening in the kingdom of God versus what's happening in the kingdom of earth. But what if there is another way? What if there's something bigger happening in the world around us? 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 says, brothers and sisters, verse 13, we do not want you to be uninformed about those who sleep in death, so that you do not grieve like the rest of mankind who have no hope. We don't even grieve like other people because we know there's something else happening here. We can see a little bit outside of what's happening in this place right in front of us. And so we don't have to grieve like everybody else because we know there's something bigger happening here. Romans chapter 12, verse 2, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, and then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. There is a world that's trying to conform us into its image, and God says, don't be conformed there, be transformed in your mind. We don't have to grieve like everybody else because we know there's something bigger. We don't have to follow that path that everybody else is going on. We can be transformed. We can think differently. Ephesians 5:15, be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise. There are two ways to go about this thing. Are we going to go about it the way of the world? Or are we going to go about it the way that God calls us to? God is asking us to see the world differently, to live in the world differently, to see that there's something bigger happening than what we see just right in front of our faces. So many times we look at the atrocities happening around us, war, famine, natural disasters, pain, suffering, and we might be tempted to wonder, where is God if all of this is happening? In essence, we keep looking for ways to avoid the fiery furnace. We keep looking for ways to avoid the lion's den. And instead, the book of Daniel teaches us that we should be looking for God in the middle of the fiery furnace. We should be finding God in the heart of the lion's den. God says he's going to rescue us and the end is going to turn out different. But he didn't keep them out of the furnace. He didn't keep Daniel out of the lion's den. Instead, God showed up in the furnace and God showed up in the lion's den. The book of Daniel teaches us that not all is as it seems. God is working. God is showing up. There is an alternate reality here if we would take the time to see it. Let's end with the words of Daniel, chapter 7, as again we get to peek behind the curtain a little bit. We get to see, at least through this vision of Daniel, what's happening behind the scenes. What's happening in this alternate reality as chaos is erupting on earth for God's people. God sends Daniel this vision. As I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow. The hair of his head was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the book was opened. A few verses later, in my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. And so as God looks at Daniel and he sends in these visions, and they look at what's going to happen for the next 300 years of their lives, and all the chaos and all of the craziness and all of the war and all of the battles and God's people stuck right in the middle, Daniel says it looks really bad, but there's a future coming, and it's going to end differently because the Ancient of Days is on the throne and the Son of Man is on the way. And so when we look at the world around us and we tend to get down, or we tend to think, where is God in all of this? May we remember Daniel. May we remember these visions, all of the things that are going to happen to them over the next few years, not few years, hundreds of years, all of the craziness. And remember that God is still on the throne and the Son of Man is still coming. There is an alternate reality if we would continue to look for it. Let's stand together. We'll sing one more song. Josh is going to come up and lead us. If I can pray for you this morning, I'd be happy to do that. If you come find me down front as we sing. Josh.